Hello guys, welcome back, and today I'm going to be talking about the St. Louis Blues and if they can make the playoffs this season. Now, the St. Louis Blues had a rough start, but with their second half resurgence and the weak Western Conference, can they actually make the playoffs? Now, the St. Louis Blues came into this season with a ton of hype, a ton of expectations to be not just a playoff contender, but to make the playoffs and maybe do something in the playoffs. And this season, I thought the same thing. I predicted them to be third in the Central Division. I thought they were going to have a pretty solid season, allow their guys to bounce back, and with the season started, it didn't really end up that way. And the first half of the St. Louis Blues this NHL season was not exactly pretty. They had quite a bit of drama, quite a bit of trade rumors, and of course on the actual ice itself, the Blues were not performing and they were not getting it done. A team that was looked at as maybe a Stanley Cup potential winner went down to a team that was possibly tanking for Jack Hughes. And with all the expectations that they had, they pretty much failed every single one of them. Guys like Tarasenko were still not performing, Pietrangelo was not having a great season, and once again, Jake Allen was not getting it done. And it got so bad to the point where teammates were fighting each other, Sanford and Bertuzzo, and that whole drama. It was pretty bad, and then there was the trade rumors about Tarasenko and Pietrangelo possibly getting traded, which might still happen, but it was a lot more apparent in a few weeks ago. But with the St. Louis Blues, it got really, really bad, but for their franchise and for the team right now, it's starting to get at least a little bit better. Now, of course, the St. Louis Blues ended up firing Mike Yeo. They ended up replacing him with Craig Berube, and there wasn't really a flip of the switch in the Blues play. They seemed like the same old team as we know before, but they started stockpile some wins there. Some of the players like Tarasenko started to play better, and the Blues started to play just a little bit better, and they continued to do that throughout the last few weeks, and now they've kind of entered themselves into this weird NHL playoff race in the Western Conference. And with the St. Louis Blues, it's not like they have the best record, but they're still in a playoff fight, which is all that matters for them right now. Now, right now, the St. Louis Blues have a record of 21-21-5. They're currently 4 points out of the playoff race as I am recording this. But the Western Conference race, it isn't the greatest one, but it is very, very close. You got quite a few teams battling it out for that second wildcard spot, and even the first wildcard spot. So there's I would say 7 teams that are realistically up there to compete to the last season game. And with the St. Louis Blues, they are no exception. Even though they have a .500 record right now, they still are in that race for the playoffs, and that's kind of crazy to see as a guy that was realizing that whole Blues run throughout the start of the season. I would have never thought the Blues would be in this position to compete for a playoff spot right now, but even in that weak Western Conference, they've been getting it done and are close to that playoff spot. And with the St. Louis Blues, currently they have 47 points in 47 games. And even though the Western Conference race is not all that great, that's not going to be good enough to make the playoffs. So the St. Louis Blues really do not need to have a consistent and solid second half if they want to make the playoffs. And if they do want to make the playoffs, I would assume that guys like Tarasenko and Pietrangelo do stay, even though both of those guys have been in trade rumors. If the St. Louis Blues are serious about making the playoffs, which their owners are, I feel like they'll want to keep those guys, and if they do, they have a pretty solid chance of the playoffs, especially with that weak Western Conference. Now, with the Western Conference playoff race, there are quite a few teams that the St. Louis Blues are going to have to battle with to make sure they can make the playoffs. Teams like the Avalanche, Stars, Wild, the Ducks, Canucks, Oilers, Coyotes, those teams are all in the playoff mix right now, and the St. Louis Blues obviously included. But with the St. Louis Blues, are going to need to beat those teams, or going to need to jump those spots, because with the St. Louis Blues, as I'm recording this, they're currently 6th in that spot, or in that placing in the wild card race right now. So they're going to need to hop over some teams, and of course, they're going to need to get the winning going if they want to make the playoffs. But the St. Louis Blues have been able to crawl back in that Western Conference playoff race, which is something that I would have never expected from them early in the season. Early in the season, it seemed like that team was down for the count. The morale was terrible. There was no locker room chemistry. They were not going to get done on the ice. They were absolute crap. But now the St. Louis Blues, it's like they've turned a page, and they're not playing like the greatest team in the world, but they're able to get some wins here and there, and they're able to get it done enough to be in the playoff race right now, which for them is quite good enough. And I think a lot of that right now for the St. Louis Blues has to do with Jordan Binnington. He has been fantastic this season as a goaltender. It's something that the Blues have needed. And while Jake Allen has been better in the second half, Jordan Binnington has been amazing and has been a great story in this rookie class. Now, so far he's played 7 games, of course, as a goalie. He has 4 wins and 1 overtime loss. And so far he has a 1.62 goals against average and a .936 save percentage. So he's definitely getting it done with the St. Louis Blues, and that's a story that the St. Louis Blues needed this season, and they finally got it. And who knows really how long that Binnington story lasts, but St. Louis is going to need more stories like that to boost that morale on the team. Throughout this season, they've had some adversities, to say the least, and I feel like with this current locker room, with that current team, I think they're good enough to make the playoffs, but I think a lot of it has to do with the mental side of hockey and how they've been getting it done. But they've been playing better lately, and if they want to make the playoffs, they got to continue to stockpile those wins. And even though the Western Conference is not all that great this year, it is a tight competitive race, and the St. Louis Blues need to find themselves on the other side of it and into the playoffs. Now, the thing for me throughout this whole season for St. Louis, I think the thing that affects them the most right now is what they do with the NHL trade deadline. Of course, we've seen the rumors of them possibly going away from Tarasenko, possibly trading Alex Pietrangelo, maybe even Colton Parayko. But if they do decide to go get rid of those guys, if they do decide to blow up some of the core, I don't think they're making the playoffs this year, even if it might be a weak Western Conference. If you're going to give up guys like Tarasenko and Pietrangelo, I don't think they're going to get in. But even though they aren't having the greatest seasons, guys like Tarasenko, Pietrangelo, Colton Parayko even, are guys that you need to keep if you want to make the playoffs. And with the St. Louis Blues, their main goal this offseason, the main goal going into the season was to make the playoffs and to be a competitive team. And with guys like Tarasenko and Pietrangelo, they are starting to finally get competitive, and they are competitive in that Western Conference race. And if St. Louis wants to make the playoffs, I mean, that was their ultimate goal, I feel like they're going to want to keep those guys, even if they might be swirling in the trade rumors, and even if they might get a good return for them. But the St. Louis Blues are definitely going to be an interesting team to watch in this trade deadline. It is pretty much a month from now. So with the St. Louis Blues, they're going to be interesting to see to watch if they buy, if they get pieces, or if they sell the pieces that they already have. Because if the St. Louis Blues are serious about making the playoffs, they'll likely keep the guys that were in those trade rumors initially. And for the St. Louis Blues, it will be a tough decision to make. Obviously, it'll be a pretty big one, but it's one that they're going to have to make. So for me, they're going to be one of the more intriguing teams to watch, because I could see them selling, and I could also see them buying at the same time. But even if they do sell off guys like Pietrangelo and Tarasenko, I honestly would not be surprised to see them still make the playoffs, especially if that weak Western Conference where almost anybody can get in, besides Chicago. But to the question of if St. Louis can actually make the playoffs, it's honestly a pretty hard one to predict right now. With the St. Louis Blues, it is their destiny. Whether they make the playoffs or not will be up to them, obviously. But the St. Louis Blues are going to have to pass quite a few teams to get into the playoffs. And even though it is a weak Western Conference, it's weak because a lot of teams are battling for those wildcard spots. And St. Louis is going to have to be one of those teams that prevails to do it. So while St. Louis, I think, has a strong chance to make the playoffs, it's going to be up to them. And of course, they're going to have to fight for a lot of teams to be able to make sure that they have that playoff spot. And I'm honestly going back and forth on whether I should choose St. Louis to make the playoffs or not, but for me, I'm going to say St. Louis just misses the playoffs. With this weak Western Conference, there are a lot of teams battling for those wildcard spots, and with St. Louis, I think they are going to put up a fight, but I think they're going to miss just short in that really competitive Western Conference. But the bright side of this week Western Conference is that we got a lot of teams fighting for playoff spots. And with the St. Louis Blues, they've been a very interesting team to follow along this season. With all the drama and, of course, the winning lately, they're going to be a very interesting team to watch throughout the second half of the season to see how well they do or to see how well they don't do. But of course, with this video, I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comments down below. So let me know, what do you think about the St. Louis Blues? What do you think about the weak Western Conference race? And of course, do you think the St. Louis Blues will make the playoffs? But if you guys want some more grab videos, you can watch this video where we talk about Jack Hughes and what would happen if he was a Chicago Blackhawk. But that is going for today, guys. If you guys enjoy, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you haven't already. You can comment down below your thoughts on the St. Louis Blues and if they'll make the playoffs. And I'll see you guys in the next video or stream. Goodbye.